Kirk Potter get started? Where were you born, and what was growing up like? When did you first encounter pipes and drums? Tell me all about it.
Sure. So I'm born and bred in Dundee in Scotland, which I think is Scotland's fourth biggest city.
Yeah, that's one of those places we hear about even over here.
Yeah. So we're on the east coast of Scotland, sort of midway between Edinburgh and Aberdeen. And I grew up in an area of Dundee called Lochee, which is...
It's fun to say.
Yeah, very, very Scottish.
Yeah, you can clear your throat out with that one. That's perfect.
And the thing that's interesting about Lochee actually is that Lochee is back in the day, if you like, but long before I was born, it was kind of seen as being almost a little town or village in its own right, almost separate from the main city of Dundee, and even to this day, it kind of maintains its own identity, if you like, within Dundee. About 11 or 12 years old, I got involved in a youth organisation which used to be rather big in the UK, and isn't quite so big now. And it's called the Boys Brigade.
I think Adrian Melvin might have mentioned that he got started playing with the same kind of.
Well, it's really interesting because Adrian was in the same pipe band that I learnt to play in.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
there you go.
And I know it's a small world now that Adrian's over in the States and he's doing his thing with his reeds and his band work and all that. But yeah, Adrian was a member of the same organisation, not just the organisation, but the same what we would call a company as I was.
Like the same Boy Scout troop for us American folks.
Absolutely, yeah,
Gotcha.
the same troop, the same troop, if you like, So, I only ever met Adrian maybe a few times way back in the day, and he was a bit older than me, so.
Could you see that he was destined for greatness even then?
I think there was a great recognition that Adrian was a very, very good bagpiper, absolutely no doubt about that. And you see that a lot. I mean, I think to be fair, in an organisation which is youth oriented. You can pick out the guys that are going to be really good players. I think another person that people might have heard of that was in the band for a while was a guy called by the name of Kyle Howie.
Yeah.
Kyle was with the Red Hot Chili Pipers. Has a bit of a social media presence these days as well. The Boys Brigade actually, as an organisation as a whole across Scotland, has produced many fine pipers and drummers.
And what, like, did you know about it and want to join, or were your parents like, let's keep him out of trouble and put him in the Boys Brigade, or like, what was the motivation to get you in there?
Well, it's interesting because the Boys Brigade caters for kids from a very young age, like as young as maybe 6 or 7 years old, and I was 11 or 12 before I joined, and in my case it was a case of going to what we would call here secondary school, so the high school, if you like, and the people who were in my class at school were in the Boys Brigade just along the street from me, and I'm like kind of thinking, okay, I was aware of it. I think I'll give that a go, and I never really looked back. To the extent I'm still involved in the same band, I'm still involved with, I have lots and lots of friends that are in my social circle that are all from the Boys Brigade connection. And I think being in the Boys Brigade and being in the band has been a great experience in the sense that it's afforded me lots of opportunities to go and play abroad, in Europe and places like that. And I've formed lots of connections in lots of different places all through band work, but specifically band work connected to the Boys Brigade, which has been great.
And is the Boys Brigade is pipe band a strong focus in the organization, or is it one among many things you could do there?
Well, I think if you take our company for example, we always kind of try and put it in perspective and say, whilst the band is a very popular part of what the company does as a whole, it is only just one other thing that we do. And you see some Boys Brigade companies across Scotland who have maybe quite a strong pipe band, but maybe are less prominent in other areas that the Boys Brigade can offer in terms of activities. So I think it's different depending on where you go, essentially. But certainly in our Boys Brigade company, I mean, our company itself is well over 100 years old.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And the band itself is over 100 years old as well. Interestingly, it used to be a bugle band originally, back in the day. And then it transitioned to being a pipe band. And there's a famous quote that comes from the ex-pipe major, his father, so we're probably going back a couple of generations at least, and he said that the pipes took the wind from the bugles, which I think is quite a poetic way of putting it.
Yeah, that's about right. I can relate to that. When I was a kid, I kind of it sounds funny to say, but when I first got into the funeral music biz, it was as a bugler for military funerals, but bagpipes pretty quickly supplanted that in my life as well. Took the wind out of it. So had you played drums before you joined the Boys Brigade there in secondary school? So that was totally new to you, huh?
It was absolutely fundamentally, brand new to me, and I think it's quite interesting. We joke about this in the pipe band, in that a lot of people end up not playing what is their first choice of instrument.
That's a good point.
This might offend some of your listeners.
No, I think you're right. Go on.
But the hierarchy, if you like, in the pipe band is piper, snare drummer, tenor drummer / bass drummer. Now, I'm not saying for a minute I subscribe to that, but we have a little joke, a little running joke in the band, and we say to guys, bass drummer, what was your first choice instrument?
Because it surely wasn't bass drum.
Exactly, and in my case, I kind of went straight in and was very keen to be a snare drummer. Never had any aspirations of being a bagpiper, and certainly didn't have any aspirations of being a tenor drummer. Although I think all snare drummers secretly want to be the bass drummer every once in a while, even just for one gig sort of thing. And we've all done it. We've all had a go on the bass at some point in time. It was. I can't actually remember back. It's that long ago, but I certainly went straight for the snare drum. I didn't consider any of the other instruments back in the time.
Any musicians in your immediate family in the household when you were a kid there, or were you the only one who had like practice time and making noise off in his room, that kind of stuff?
My dad used to play the guitar and sing quite a lot, and I always remember, back in the traditional Scottish New Year party, or Hogmanay as we would call it. My dad would always get the guitar out, and we would all sort of sing along to the music that he played, which was a variety of, maybe some folk music, but Irish folk music, and right up to sort of more modern, pop type sort of stuff that he would try his hand to. So my dad was quite musical in that sense. I wouldn't say particularly accomplished, which again isn't intended to offend him, but he could knock out a tune, I think would be the phrase. So he was quite good. Other than that, there wasn't really a huge amount of musical influence in my immediate family, although two of my cousins were pipers.
Gotcha.
And
convenient.
They joined the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards when they were kind of old enough to do so, and the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards, again back in the day, were a very well-known band, and the reason they were well-known is that you may or may not be aware, they were the first people to record. I think it was Highland Cathedral or Amazing Grace. I can never remember.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
But I think they ended up in the charts at like number 1 or something like that, or certainly thereabouts.
I think that even now, if you just look for Highland Cathedral on YouTube, theirs is the first one that comes up. Yeah.
So they kind of popularised, if you like, the idea that you could take what is quite a traditional tune, albeit one not written by a Scotsman.
Right, it's German in origin, isn't it?
It's German, yeah. Which is always, it's one of those sort of fun facts to carry around with you, but it's also pretty well known fun fact these days. But they popularised the idea that you could take traditional instrument, traditional music, or semi-traditional music, and turn it into something that everyone wants to listen to. So my two cousins were, I suppose, an influence to some extent as well, because again, back when we were kids and we'd have these family get-togethers in the year, they would crack out the pipes and play some tunes, and it was a type of music that I enjoyed, and as a result, I suppose I wanted to get involved. Probably never had the the talent to be a piper, but being a drummer was something that I felt was achievable.
I think I'm gonna have some drummers sending me angry emails after.
Oh, you might do, but this is a drummer talking as a
That's
drummer.
right. So you can. Hey, let me just make it clear, everybody. I'm not saying it. Kirk's saying it. Kirk is the drummer, and he's the one who's saying it.
And this probably reflects to some extent that I get a lot. People I work with kind of say to me, "You're so pessimistic, Kirk," and I'm just being honest here.
Yeah.
And
it's you say no, I'm realistic.
Yeah, well, it's a very personal thing when I say that. You know what I mean? I never felt that I had the skill or talent to be a piper. I think that's fair to say. But I felt I can turn my hand to drumming. I'm sure there are people who are maybe the other way around. Who kind of thought, drumming, that's a bit intricate, and there's quite a lot going on there. I can play the pipes, and I think as well it comes down to that melodic versus rhythmic sort of brain space, if you like. And I appreciate that there's a huge amount of rhythmic knowledge involved in playing the pipes, but you have a melody. You have a melody, generally speaking, to remind you of what it is that you're actually trying to reproduce. That melody can
dictate that rhythm in many ways.
Yeah, very much so. And I think when you're a drummer, you've got to remember the rhythm, and you've always got to appreciate that you're an accompanying instrument the majority of the time. So as a result, you'll understand the tune, you'll understand the melody, but you probably couldn't reproduce it accurately. Us drummers singing the pipe tunes is usually a pretty bad rendition.
By the end it all sounds like Scott and the Brave, so where did we start? It's funny that you mentioned that. I like, in my personal limited experience, I think your observation is spot on. Like, it makes me think of how often a person is like, in school they're often like either pretty good at math or pretty good at like English and literature, but not always. Like, sometimes somebody's very good at both, and certainly somebody can work hard and get good at both, but there seems to be sort of a natural tendency toward one end of the spectrum or the other. And it feels kind of like rhythm and melody have kind of a similar, you're kind of going to lean one way naturally.
I don't know the psychology behind it, but I do imagine that they probably use different parts of the brain, and as in the same way that some people are good at football versus some people are good at solving crosswords or whatever. You're using different skill sets, even though we're all typically in the same genre, and in many cases playing together in the same band or whatever it happens to be.
Well, so did the Boys Brigade involvement with pipes and drums, has that been continuous up until today, or did you go away to college and play with a different band, or did you take a break? Like, how did it kind of evolve from your youth?
Yeah, I suppose I have shown a lack of ambition, might be one observation.
That's funny for me, having just looked through like all the products you've been producing and stuff. But go on.
Well, I think from a piping and or a pipe band sort of CV, mine's is probably the most boring CV you will ever read because I've been involved in that Boys Brigade band for. Since I was 12 years old, and I'm 48 today. So
hey, happy birthday!
Well, no, I don't mean today.
I see.
I just mean that
Tell you what, take my happy birthday and save it for the next one.
Yeah, I've got another whatever it is, 8 months until I celebrate my birthday. But yeah, I've been involved in that band in some capacity, either as a teacher or as a player. For 36 years.
That's pretty cool, though. I mean, not a ton of us could say that we've been involved with one organization for that long. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to the friendships that I've developed, and it's quite strange for me. As I say, at 48 years old, sort of middle aged, a lot of my friends, and I'm talking about guys I go out and have a beer with, and that are in their late 20s, early 30s, which is quite an age gap, and that's because they come through the band as kids, they've grown up to be adults, and they've continued their involvement in the band in one way, shape or form, and as a result we end up socialising quite a bit, so it keeps me on my toes, if you like. I know I'm not old in the grand scheme of things, but it gives me an outlook that's very much a good few years younger than my chronological age, which is great.
I don't mean to veer too far from the path, though that's kind of what we do here. But it does make me think about, like, you hear social scientists and folks like that talking about how important it is to maintain connections to people who are not exactly the same as you. Whether that's age segmentation, political affiliation, religious preference, and all that kind of stuff, and how community groups and activities are a great vehicle for that. And how those kind of groups, like sort of your Rotary clubs and stuff like that, maybe are disappearing from modern society in some way. And so maybe pipe band is kind of one of those opportunities to have these sort of the segmentation of society. You can reach across those segmentations and have friendships with people of all walks.
I mean, I see it a lot. I teach a band in Belgium, and I go over there sort of once every 2 years to do workshops with them. And it's very obvious to me in that sort of circle because a lot of these people are strangers to me, if you like. But once you start to get to know them, you realise that they all come from a whole spectrum of different backgrounds, and they do different jobs. They may they have different life circumstances. But the pipe band is the one thing that they have in common. And for me, as a foreigner and a stranger coming into that environment, I can slot in, if you like, because the one thing I have in common with them is pipe band. And I think it's a really interesting, and I know this has been well talked about, but it is true to say that the music and the involvement in a particular genre of music, be it pipe bands in this case, is something that connects us all who have an interest in it. And no matter where you go or what you're doing, if you bump into a fellow piper or drummer, you have an instant connection that maybe other people who don't have those kind of interests would have. And as I said earlier, certainly that being involved in pipe bands has afforded me so many different opportunities across my life so far, and I've made many great friends, and it's I kind of think what would life be like without it, which is a difficult thing to contemplate. Of course, like anything, it's like saying, well, what if I didn't do this, or what if I didn't do that? But certainly I think my life wouldn't be as full in terms of the connections I made if it wasn't for being involved in pipe bands. No doubt about it.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with that precise idea. Yeah, and I feel like that's something I've heard from a lot of people. That like, of course, the music is rewarding. It's kind of a high demand hobby as well. And so you put a lot of work into it, so it better be worth it. And what makes it worth it? Most people that I've asked that kind of question or who talk about this kind of stuff have said that in the end it is those connections, the friendships, the relationships, which is absolutely a pretty beautiful thing.
Yeah, definitely.
But Kirk, when did you become an IT guy? And also, before you tell me that, I just want to know, I've worked in sort of like the government Parks and Recreation department before, and so I know that here in the United States, I don't know how popular Parks and Rec has been internationally, but it's a TV show that's very popular amongst people who work in Parks and Rec departments. I know I've worked in an office, and I know that The Office, UK version or US version, is very popular amongst office workers, especially. So if you're an IT guy, did you love the IT crowd? And do all IT guys love that? Or is it like too many tropes and you hate it? Like, what's the situation there?
I knew you were leading to that question as you were going through that there. To be fair, it's not a show that I've really invested in. I watched bits and pieces of it, but it's not really my bag. And I don't think it's got anything to do with the fact that I'm an IT person and it's a comedy about IT. I think it's more a case of it's just not my kind of television, if you like.
I thought maybe it was going to be the case that you can't pronounce Richard's last name, because I certainly can't, and so I would never be able to really talk very fluently about it. Cannot pronounce that guy's last name.
Adeneo?
That's about as close as I can get.
Yeah, he's quite big over here now in sort of other spin-off sort of thing. But he's done various. He's hosted various other sort of shows.
Yeah, he seems to do a lot of quiz shows, right?
Yeah, he's done a few quiz shows and things like that. But there's a show called The Crystal Maze. I don't know if you've ever come across that. It was really big here in the sort of 80s and 90s. And it was hosted originally by Richard O'Brien, who's the guy I think co-wrote the Rocky Horror Show. Yeah,
is that the one? Is that the show where they need to? And I'm not talking about the Rocky Horror Show here. I know which one that one is. But is that one the one where they have to like the contestants have to do like strange, like they have to swim through mazes and stuff like that? And it's like they win money for charity at the end.
it's that kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
They have to get crystals, and then at the end,
That's
they
right.
They go in a big globe with silver and gold sort of token things that are floating in the air, and they have to grab them. But anyway, it's stranger things you talk about when you talk about pipes, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, so Richard hosted a new version, a modern version of that, and I loved the original show, and I just didn't think the new show was great. And I don't know whether it was him or just the production, but it wasn't the same show it was. But yeah.
Well, that's so often happens.
I think we're off on a tangent of a tangent.
Yeah, let's see if we can reel this back in here for a sec. IT. How'd you get into IT? Did you always love computers, or was it like, well, there's money there, so I guess I'll go that way? Or, what was the situation?
It's quite an interesting story. This there was a home computer back in 1982, 1983 called the Sinclair Spectrum. Now, probably doesn't. Not jogging any memories of anyone in the United States, but anyone in the UK of a certain age will remember the Sinclair Spectrum very, very affectionately. It was a small, if you take an average laptop, it was about 2/3 of the size of an average laptop. You plugged it into your television rather than having an actual screen that went with it. It had rubberized keys. It was a very strange device, and the bottom line was that this is before the days of much more modern, personal computers and things like that. It predated that, but it was a colour. I suppose it was the first sort of games machine, if you like. And you used to have to do things like load the games through a cassette recorder or from tape.
Are we talking like pre-floppy disk?
Oh yeah,
like magnetic tape.
Yeah, well,
wow.
the tape. It used normal cassettes.
Right,
yeah. That you would use just for, and even that some of your listeners will be, well, what's that? What's a cassette?
Sure, that's true. Yeah.
So we're pre-CD here. We're pre all of that stuff, but we were talking about a standard. Memorex was one of the people or JVC were the people who made these cassettes, and basically you plugged your cassette recorder into your Sinclair Spectrum. You plugged your television in, and you hit load, ditto, or quote, pressed enter on the keyboard, and then you press play on this thing, and you sat for 3 minutes until it loaded in the game, and you hoped that it got to the end and didn't fall over by the time it got there. So the Sinclair Spectrum was the thing that's interesting about this is that it was a British invention, but it was made here in Dundee. There is a company who I'm sure many people heard of called Timex who make watches.
Yeah, wearing one right now.
So Timex had a manufacturing plant in Dundee, and I don't quite know the ins and outs of it, but they were selected to manufacture the Spectrum. And I didn't get one until about maybe a year after they originally came out. They were quite expensive back in the day, so I think. So we're talking 1982, so I would have been 9 years old. They were about 120 British pounds, so I don't know, 180 US dollars. You think about that, today that's not an insignificant amount of money. It wouldn't be a lot of money for a laptop or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
But you think we're going back here nearly 40 years, yeah. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, inflation has happened in the meantime.
Yeah. So what I used to do is I used to go into town on a weekend. I think I was old enough to do so. I might have been 10 years old, something like that. And I used to go into the little stores that sold electronics and all that, and they used to have all these computers. There was other personal computers other than Spectrum, all with their little televisions, all lined up, just as a sort of demonstration of what they were. But this is quite unbelievable, I suppose, but I learned my first bit of computer programming just on a Saturday afternoon, standing in one of these stores. I experimented, I watched other guys, there was other people like me who were doing the same thing, and over time I learned to be able to write code. Pretty rudimentary stuff, but I learned to write code. And eventually I managed to persuade my parents to buy me one of these Sinclair Spectrums, and it just so happened we had a neighbour who worked at the Timex factory, and he got something like, I don't know, 10% off because he worked there.
Sure.
So I didn't get the retail box. It's quite interesting, it's the retail box is all nice and colourful. I mean, I just got this brown box that had it in it.
Did it have like that rainbow motif that like the Commodore 64 and the early Apple machines and all that we're all running with? Yeah.
Yeah, because that's why, obviously Sync or Spectrum.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Because it was colour.
The most fitting one, yeah.
Yeah, and it had that, the Spectrum sort of logo. I think it went off at an angle and it had the colours of the rainbow in it. But yeah, I didn't get the nice retail packaging because it was basically not quite off the back of a lorry, if you like. But it wasn't the retail spec, if you like. But but I remember unboxing that Christmas Day, and I knew it was getting it, and I spent probably the next 2-3 years just writing code, and creating my own games and doing all that sort of stuff. And I was really, really interested in it, and as time went on, and I got the opportunity to do computing at school, which was quite a new subject at that time. I think, for your listeners that are in the UK, or certainly in Scotland, we used to do, O grades or ordinary grades, and then the next level up of qualification we did was hires. To put it in perspective, I was only the second year in Scotland to do a higher in computing. There was only 1 year that had been around before that. So, my age was I was probably quite fortunate in that formal qualifications at school level in computing were just coming on stream.
Yeah, you were coming in on the ground level, as it were.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed doing computing at school, and I had a pretty good idea from quite a young age, maybe 14, 15, maybe even younger, that I wanted to work in the industry. But it's a big, even back then, it was a big, diverse industry. So to work in IT, in inverted commas, could mean anything really. You didn't have to work in software. You could work in other aspects of it. But I went on to university, and I did a degree, which was essentially a science degree. So our first year we did mathematics, and we did some computing, but we also did things like physics and all that sort of stuff, which were not really my favourite subjects, to be honest. I was only really there for the computing part, but the nature of the course that I did meant that I had to do all that stuff.
Yeah, it always comes with hoops you got to jump through.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing about computing generally is there is quite a lot of maths involved in it, depending on what you do, but probably not so much the work I do these days. There's some simple maths, but there's not really hardcore maths. But obviously, if you're working in computer games industry and things like that, there's a whole ton of maths involved in everything that you do. So yeah, I got my degree in 1994, which seems like an absolute eternity away. But yeah, 1994 I graduated from what is now the University of Abertay. So it's kind of Dundee's second university. University of Dundee is one of the old school universities in Scotland. The institute I went to was originally called Dundee Institute of Technology, so it was more of what we would call in the UK back then was a polytechnic, so it was more of a technical college, if you like.
And was it affiliated with the older Dundee school at the time? Like
no,
not at all, huh?
No, very probably. I would imagine. I can't say this for sure, but I would imagine they were quite competitive with each other because
trying to get heads.
Getting heads is what these places are all about. Yeah. So, but what happened is I think the Scottish government were keen to see these smaller institutions achieve their charter, if you like, as a university. So they afforded them the opportunity, and obviously they had to meet certain standards. So I graduated twice, and the only reason I graduated twice is because I did an ordinary degree and then I did an honours year, and you had the option what you wanted to do, and you could actually end up graduating twice. So I'm a bit strange in that I have my degree certificate for my ordinary degree is from Dundee Institute of Technology, and my degree certificate for my honours graduation is from University of Abertay. But essentially,
it's because it changed in the meantime.
It changed name, but essentially the same. Place.
Well, that looks better on the CV because now it looks like you've been, you traveled around and studied quite a bit. So great.
Yeah, there is that.
So you were a computer guy. Sounds like just naturally it was born right out of you from the beginning. A computer guy who picked up drumming along the way.
Yeah.
And then these worlds collided or merged together. How conscious of an effort was that? And And maybe right here we pause for just a sec, Kirk, in case anybody listening doesn't know already. You recently won the Big Rab Awards for the 2021. Was it the most innovative product, or was it the best new innovation? I'm trying to remember the exact category.
The exact category was best new innovation / product. I think it was.
Mm-hmm. And that was for Ensemble, of course.
Yeah.
But that wasn't even your first bit of bagpipe software, or like what I'm thinking of is PadLab. That, man, PadLab blew my mind the first time I saw that. And so when I saw that you had your fingerprints on that, I was like, oh man, well that's already impressing me. And since then I've been looking into Ensemble and becoming only more impressed. But so that's why I'm talking to you right now, right? And so having said that, now tell me, how did the computer guy and the drum guy come together in your head?
Yeah, I think it's one of these sort of natural things, and it's interesting when I speak to other people who have expressed an interest in some of the products that I've built. And if they come from an IT background, it's surprising the amount of people say to me, "Yeah, I had a go at doing something like this, a few years ago, but I never really, got right into it. I never finished it, but I had." So I think it's probably not an uncommon thing for people who are involved in IT, but also have a hobby of some interest, no matter what it is, to try and apply your skills to it. And for me, I think, I can trace my interest in getting involved in software around piping and drumming way back to the early 2000s. There was a product back then that is still on sale today but hasn't been updated for a long time, called Drumscreeve.
I have not heard of that one.
Yeah.
Of course, I know about Bagpipe Music Writer, but that's because I'm a piper. I'm assuming that was kind of like a drummer's Bagpipe Music Writer.
Yeah, it was. Interestingly, with a point-and-click interface, though, unlike Bagpipe Music Writer, which, as we know, you have to be conversant in...
Yeah. Wait, how did the drummers get a point-and-click? That doesn't sound fair. I struggled.
Well, I think the thing was, it came at a price, though, that point-and-click interface, because it was a bit buggy, to be honest. So the amount of times that I lost what I was working in Drumscreeve was pretty frustrating. It was one of those things where I suppose somewhat naively I kind of thought, yeah, this is all right, but I think I could do better. I think that was kind of my thoughts, but I can't trace back to the exact point in time where I had that thought. It certainly wasn't the first time I ever used the software or anything like that. But I'm kind of thinking to myself, yeah, this is cool, but there is an opportunity to do more. So it was one of these sort of pet projects, if you like, that I picked up and put down more times than I cared to think about. I started trying to create effectively my own version of that round about 2007 or somewhere around then. And the idea was to create, in a similar way, what I would call a desktop piece of software. So something that you install on your computer, and in the same way that you do with Drumscreeve and other products like Celtic Pipes and so on. That was kind of my thinking. But I think it's fair to say, and anyone listening who's ever attempted these kind of things, it's not a trivial thing to do.
I don't doubt it. I've never tried it myself, but that's
There's a lot of complexity involved in bringing together a software tool that affords itself to be easy to use, but also has the inherent capabilities that people are looking for from a notation tool. And as a result, that's why I probably picked it up and put it down more times than I care to remember. But I kind of had a bit of an epiphany in I think it was around about 2014-15. And what kind of made me really push on with this was that web technology had become mature enough and widespread enough that it made sense to be able to, or to try and build a tool for pipeband people using the web, and rather than using traditional desktop or building traditional desktop tools. And right from the get-go on that, my thinking was, if I can do this, this is kind of revolutionary, and I mean that in the most humble sort of way you can use the word revolutionary.
Oh yeah, I don't doubt it. But I think that's the first thing that drew me in. I was like, wait, web based? Well, no, this could be handy for so many reasons.
Yeah, and I in my professional IT work, if you like, away from what we're talking about here, I spent a long time working with web technologies and working with customers, and accessibility was a big thing, and still is, about making the web work for anyone on any device with, people who may have specific disabilities, like some kind of cognitive disability or a vision disability or anything of that nature. I spent a long time working on honing my skills to understand how the web could be used in that way. And as a result, that's kind of how I arrived at the point to say, well, hang on a minute, I think the web might be the way forwards with this. And as I say, about 2015, I thought, you know what, I'm gonna take this on again. I've got a clear vision of what I'm trying to achieve, and I'm going to do it. And what I did was I thought, I'm going to start with drumming, because I'm a drummer. And
of course, yeah.
I don't know a huge amount about bagpipe. I do sort of, I've been around the pipe band world for long enough, but I didn't feel confident enough to take on both of those things at one time, and there was a lot of problems that needed to be solved. So I spent 2 years, obviously on a part-time basis, but probably many thousands of hours, and I eventually plucked up the courage to release my first product, which was called Drum Writer. And it was kind of a play on the bagpipe music writer sort of thing. I came up with the brand and all that sort of stuff, and I launched that in July of 2017. And I went to Glasgow. It was the week of Piping Live, so just before the Worlds. I managed to get a slot at Piping Live. I did a launch at the National Piping Centre, I think it was, and there was like 5 people in the room. We did the demo and all that sort of stuff, and we went out for beers at night and all that, and that was kind of the start of the adventure, if you like. It was quite an exciting time as well, because it was like, I think I'd spent all my time in sort of corporate IT, and I've worked on lots of different products, and I've done product development and all that. But you're doing that under a corporate banner. It's not the same as kind of going out alone, if you like, and saying, this is mine.
You're forging your own trail. You're putting your own thing out there. Yeah.
So that was kind of the first sort of stake in the ground, if you like, in terms of bringing out Drum Writer. And I suppose I got quite frustrated though, because, and I still hear this today, is that it was a bit before its time, in the sense that people were saying, you can do this stuff in the web. It was the first thing, even like you just said there, web-based, and the idea that you didn't actually have this physical file that sat on your PC or your Mac that was called Scotland the Brave dot whatever,
Right.
You didn't have that. It was in the cloud, and even today, I still get an uneasiness from people, where they say...
We are a traditional group, are we not?
Well, this is... I know we might talk about this a bit later on, but myself and Michael Eagle from Rhythm Monster, we talk about this all the time. The pipe band world is I don't mean this to be derogatory in any way, are quite an insular group of people. We're probably a little bit hesitant and a little bit conservative when it comes to innovation and change. And I faced that, I think, absolutely face on when Drum Writer came out, and I had some people just thought, this is brilliant, this is the best idea ever, give me it, and these people are still subscribers today in with Ensemble, and are kind of big fans, if you like, but there's other people who I've had not big conversations, but conversations around that, but who actually owns this stuff, and what happens if you suddenly stop trading, and all valid concerns, but but probably things that people are maybe thinking a bit too hard about, and it's a question of just get on and use the thing for its benefits rather than looking for where it might fall down.
For problems. Well, and I think aside from that, just in general, we have this a sort of cultural thing that, I mean, and yeah, Eagle and I talked about this too about a year ago, that it's like you don't want to bag it because it's good. It's good because preserving the tradition has a lot of value.
Yeah.
But sometimes that comes at the cost of being open to new, better innovations. And I feel like that's something that came up when I was talking with Dan as well, with McNewbies, you know, just all of the pushback he receives from sort of established pipers that, like, this isn't the way it should be done, you know, the annotation is bad and stuff like that. And, you know, you just can't help think, like, I think it's Plato who is accredited with, or was it, I don't know, man, I'm not a philosopher, Plato, Socrates, one of these big guys, that the written word becoming a thing, being like, hey, don't you do that, don't you use books, you know, because that'll rot your brain, right? Because it's like, we've always memorized stuff, so you have to memorize stuff. You can't use words on a page to remind you of how the story goes, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like as I can imagine that culturally you might also be encountering something like, bagpipe music writer was good for our ancestors and it's good for us, you know, like, we'll never change, you know. And no offense to that program, it like, you know, we all stand on the shoulders of the work that's been done before us, right? And but you know, like, well, was the point to never progress beyond a certain point, or was the point of it all to keep progressing forever, you know? So
yeah. I think there's probably 2 hours conversation just on that very topic there. And you know, the way I reflect on it is that, you know, you use the example of books, but you know, the more recent example is things even just as simple as television. And we look at the proliferation of television, we look at, you know, the way we've moved towards things like Netflix and how ubiquitous Netflix is now. Even it wasn't the case maybe 5 years ago, certainly not here in the UK. There is all those sort of cultural norms that are being, you know, twisted and moved, but essentially it's progress. And you know, I think the idea that everyone paid whatever it is, $10 a month in US currency to watch television, you know, 10 years ago that would be abhorrent. You know, this, you know, and you know, certainly in the UK, you know, we've always had free to air television.
You've always had Channel 4, you lucky bunch.
Well, and we'll not get into the argument about free to air, because the BBC is quite interesting because it's funded by a television license.
Sure, we say free to air. What do we mean, really? Like, if we go far enough with it,
there is no such thing. But I think the point I'm making is that subscription-based television, and even the type of programming these organisations make and show, is something that we've all grown accustomed to, but it's kind of sneaked up on us, if you like, in a roundabout way. And I think as consumers of technology and media and all these sort of things, I think there are some things that we seem to be quite accepting of, but there's other things that we tend to push back on a little bit. And I certainly felt the latter when it came to the software world around piping and drumming. And I still have the conversations today. You know, people say to me, you know, and I've mentioned there about subscription. My tools are subscription based. They are not
which is different. That's not the way Celtic Pipes or Bagpipe Music Writer or anybody else has done it before.
Well, interestingly, I don't know if this is a fact, but Celtic Pipes didn't offer a subscription. Then I came along, and then now they have a subscription option, but they also still have their traditional buy once type sort of approach. But you know, coming with essentially what we would call in the IT industry a software as a service type approach, again, was something where people are like, you know, I can't pay $50 and then I own this forever. And it's like, no, you can't. And you know, even just the other day, I had a conversation with someone who is, I won't name him, but he's quite a well-known drummer in North America, a snare drummer. And he kind of said, you know, I have a problem with the subscription model. I'm kind of paraphrasing here, and I said, well, okay, I make no apology for it, because the reason I make no apology for it is if you look at how, in my thinking, the reason a lot of these other tools have not been maintained and have fallen away is because they've not been funded.
Right, we're kind of a small community, so once everybody who's going to buy it buys it, that's it for cash flow. And you know, I think the software industry as a whole, or I know the software industry as a whole has recognised the fact that one-time purchases
are not sustainable.
Yeah. Now let me just say, if anybody from Adobe is listening, you could reduce the price a little bit. Go ahead and keep it, but take that price down. Good heavens! But carry on.
Yeah, so you look at Microsoft with Office 365. Again, I don't know how many people would be aware of this, but Microsoft used to have it where you bought the Office suite and you paid whatever it was, and then that was you, and then you maybe then paid a little bit more for an upgrade when a new version came out. And Microsoft quickly recognised the fact that actually we can make more money, but it also means that we can change our model so that we're not bringing out versions of these tools. We're actually continuously improving them.
Right, constant upgrades.
And that was exactly my thinking. If I go cloud, then there's nothing to install, so I can update it and change it by stealth effectively, albeit I advertise what the updates are. If I go to a subscription model, then I have a constant income that comes in that pays for the hosting and all that sort of stuff, and also gives me a little bit of a return.
And that fuels the innovation, so the tool won't stay stagnant. Of
course it does. And certainly, if you look at Ensemble, I think it's coming up for its third sort of release birthday in January. In that time, I've added literally hundreds of new features. It's not, the product I launched in January 2019 is not the product that you see today. It's got better. It's improved. A lot of the suggestions, if you like, in that come from the users, which is great. That's because I can't be the only innovator, if you like, in that respect. I rely on my user base to come back to me with ideas. But I certainly wouldn't be doing this anymore if I didn't think it had a future for me, and part of that future has to be there has to be a commercial element to it. Because as a hobbyist, if this was a pure hobby, then
you've already got the boys' brigade. There's not room for another one of those.
Well, you'd have to be super dedicated because
or just independently wealthy as well.
Well, yeah, there is that, but even then, to do this just for the love of it, it would take a special person. And there's a large part of my motivation is that just for the love of it, but it's nice to get a return as well. I think is the way I look at it. You're talking about literally tens of thousands of hours that go into having a product that has this amount of functionality in it.
Well, and let me be clear. Like you're not paying for a spot here or anything. I think your product is really interesting and want to hear about it. And I have been using Celtic Pipes for years, and it's a great program. And I've used other stuff besides Bagpipe specific or otherwise. MuseScore is another of my favorites. So it's all good. This is all cool stuff. But a few of the things that really draw me to Ensemble that I like a lot. Number one is that it's web-based, and that might be partly because I am currently in sort of like the sometimes it's like a crisis and sometimes it's not, but I'm kind of in the process of trying to divorce myself from being tethered to either the Apple or Windows ecosystem and move to just a simple Linux kind of operating system. And so one of my big worries is, can I find software to do the things I want to do? And so anything that's web-based, I'm like, oh, good, then I can do it.
That's a really geeky thing you just said there as well, James.
Well, I take that as a compliment coming from you, sir. So that gets me excited about it. Another thing that gets me excited about it, though, is that I'm also, I don't know if I could classify myself as an audiophile, but I get real excited about good audio, and you've got very lovely sounding samples for playback on here. And I'm curious. I haven't played with it enough yet. Is one of the export options to MIDI? Can I export MIDI files from Ensemble?
You can for bagpipes. It doesn't work quite so well for drums because if you think of some of the sort of the more legato sounds that we produce in drumming, like rolls, they're quite difficult to represent accurately in MIDI because essentially what we're playing is a rapid succession of buzzes on each hand. That and those buzzes in terms of their frequency are very, very tight. So you'll never really represent that very well in MIDI. So I took the view that I just aren't going to export to MIDI for drumming because I don't really see anyone ever using it. But obviously for melodic instruments, it makes a lot of sense to export to MIDI. So the theory is that you could build your score in Ensemble, export to MIDI, and then you can do with it as you wish from there on. And obviously, if you're right into your digital stuff, then you can go from there.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I get excited about the MIDI export option just because when listening to playback, like I say, I like it to sound good. But honestly, what you've got built in sounds pretty dang good as it is. Did you gather samples for the audio options yourself? Did you outsource that? What's that? I know that can be a very time intensive process.
But it's quite interesting. Certainly with
shoot. Sorry, Kirk. I lost you for just a sec. I lost you for just a sec. Can you back up and say you had said certainly it's, and then I lost you. Just back up just a little bit and carry on if you would.
Yeah. So when it comes to the samples, I actually sourced them myself, and I didn't take a particularly high fidelity approach to this. And maybe somewhat naively, but the result actually turned out to be pretty good. So I've never had a need to change them. So just to tell you the story behind that, the drum samples were recorded in a church hall from one of my friends who's also played at a high level in drumming. He's played up in grade 1 with Inverary back a while back. And I got him to play a tap on the drum, I got to play a roll on the drum, I got him to play a flam and a drag and a few other bits and pieces. And I recorded it with if I remember right, I don't know if I even used a microphone.
Just like on your smartphone or something? Like a laptop mic?
It was a laptop mic
Wow.
on a Microsoft Surface, and I didn't know whether it would work or not work when I tried it. I just thought, I'll give it a bash. It's only 30 minutes of everyone's time. And it was quite interesting because the church hall we were in has got a big high roof. It's got a wooden floor. It's probably the worst.
That is not a soundstage, man. That's
no.
What were you thinking?
Yeah, I know, and I think the technical term for that's quite a wet sort of sound because there's a lot of reverb going on and a lot of echoes and all that. But we did it. And then it was one of those things where I'd already actually kind of built the software. I just needed to plug the samples in, essentially. And I plugged them in, and I'm like, I won't swear, but holy cow, that actually sounds really, really good. So, I'm not saying I didn't do any post-processing on them. Of course I did, but I didn't do a huge amount. And I thought, that works pretty well. We did the same with the pipes. We had to record the pipes from about 50 yards away, and we had to record them without the drones. So we just recorded the chanter. We just played the scale. The thing that's interesting about the pipe samples is that they have to be repeated, obviously, to get the length of note. So it was important there to get a really clean, well blown. Because we don't want any variation in blowing on it, obviously, because it has to be the bang on frequency. But they were all tweaked a little bit just to make sure they had the correct frequencies and so on. I had to learn a whole new science, if you like. I had to learn about just intonation. I knew nothing about or just tempering. I knew nothing about even tempered versus just tempered. Had to learn all that. But we got the pipe samples done. And it was done in the same hall. The tenor drums were done in the same building but in a different room. They were a nightmare to record because there a lot of overtones and going on in there. When you hit the drum, you get a beautiful sound, and then you get blah, blah, blah after that. So it was quite difficult to get that, but we captured that. Same with the bass drum, and then the chanter samples were done in my dining room in
were they really? It all sounds so good. That's what's making me laugh, Kirk, because I would not have thought. I was like, he surely hired like a sound booth and had a professional sitting there recording, and hours and hours of like, okay, now play it for longer, now play it louder, now play it softer. I'm slightly embarrassed by it, I suppose, in the sense that that's the expectation. But if you get a good sounding result, then why don't look that gift horse in the mouth, man? Run with it.
And then I added small pipes earlier this year, and I used a friend of mine who I know through the Pipeband, who's now actually at the Royal Conservatoire in Scotland. doing his degree there in bagpipe music, and I knew he was a big fan of small pipes, so I got him to record the small pipes for me, and he used a decent microphone and he cleaned it up and did all the things he needed to do, and I got him to make sure everything was tuned properly and all that sort of stuff. Not just, I don't mean physically tuned, I also mean digitally tuned.
Sure.
Because you're never going to get it absolutely bang on. So that was done probably a little bit more professionally than the other stuff was, and again, the result from that's really good as well. The small pipes are sounding really good in Ensemble.
I think what we'll do is at the end of the interview, as the interview fades out, I'll fade it out into that small pipe sample you sent me of Steam Train, and so people can hear that, because it does sound great. And speaking of gathering those tenor drum sounds, that's another thing that after looking at Ensemble, it was like, ooh, this is fun. Tell me, you're a drummer and you're in Scotland and you've been in this pipe band world for a few decades, and so you can tell me is it just that I was unaware of sort of how fun differently tuned tenor drums can be up until recently, or is that becoming like a hot thing? Like, are more people getting more excited about having a tenor core that's got different tones at present?
I kind of think that boat sailed a number of years ago, to be honest, James.
That's okay. I'm out of the loop on so many things at this point, so I'm not even
I don't mean that
surprised.
I don't mean that to be condescending. I just mean
not
that,
at all.
certainly the midsection is I think it's popular to call that part of the band in the United States, or the bass section, which I think is the more accurate representation that people in the UK get hung up about, in Scotland get hung up about. But that part of the band and its contribution beyond the visuals, I think, is something that's been recognised for quite a number of years now. I wouldn't like to put a time scale on it, but certainly the last 6, 7, 8 years, maybe more. And
of course, it could be only my own personal ignorance that I'm only in the last year or so becoming more aware of sort of the fun musicality there. It's also possible that maybe there's a lag in getting across the Atlantic as well. I don't know, right? Maybe in general.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, certainly the top bands in the United States will have a very well equipped, if you like, bass section, and they've been tuned in, if you pardon the pun, to that for quite.
No, I will pardon that pun. That was excellent.
But yeah, it's for me. I think it's quite interesting when you're playing a band, and you're in the band hall on whatever evening and you're rehearsing, and I think it's quite pleasing if the pipes are tuning up, which they do for hours, as we know.
It's our favorite thing to do, man.
And the band and the pipes strike up and they start playing a tune, and then maybe the snare drums join in, which kind of adds that that dynamic to what they're doing, and then you bring the bass and tenor drums in, and it. I think the technical term for it is colour, or maybe that's a more romantic term for it. But the breadth of that sound, that wall of sound that you get from all those different complementing instruments in the band, I think the tenors are the ones that really bring it alive. And if you listen to a band without tenor drums, you're probably not going to notice they're not there, but when they are there, you're really going to notice them if it's particularly if it's done well. And there's a lot of subtleties there around the volume that is being used and the rhythms that are being used, and obviously I'm not an expert in that by any shadow of the imagination, but the ensemble again, is absolutely critical to the overall listener experience within the pipe band, and I think the tenors play a huge part in that. Yeah, I can definitely see that.
It's probably I'm sure it's down to my willful ignorance in many ways. It's sort of like I started piping in sort of like in my teenage years, and maybe I just didn't pay much attention to anything but exactly what I was doing, which maybe just goes with teenager ego, but I can definitely appreciate much more now than I ever did when I was younger how great that ensemble is.
I think it's one clear area where there has been some innovation within the pipe band world, and a recognition of what is truly an instrument rather than a visualization,
not just eye candy,
what's,
right?
Yeah, but the fact it can achieve both, I think, is really cool as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, the tenor drums definitely are much more than ever now an integral part of that overall ensemble within the pipe band.
Well, speaking of which, we'll insert that sample that you sent me. This is Pipe Major Willie Gray. Is that what it?
Reason I picked that tune, and it's kind of, for me with Ensemble, it's kind of a bit of an overplayed sort of sample of what Ensemble can do, but it goes back to I was involved with the formation of another pipe band out at the back of the Boys Brigade band. We'd had quite a bit of success in the competition arena as a youth band, and we were finding it difficult to kind of square up the youth approach versus the fact that we got promoted a few times within the Royal Scottish Pipe Band Association. So we decided, long story short, to create another band, which is now competing in Grade 2, called City of Discovery Pipe Band, based here again in Dundee. And I just because of my association with the Boys Brigade and the association with the formation of that band, I played for just one season and not even a whole season with that band, and that was our opening tune to our MSR. So I used it as a test bed, if you like, because the snare, part I obviously knew I could play it. The pipes I could get easily, and then I went and approached the leading tenor and said, "Can I have your beats, please? And can you tell me what notes your colours mean?" And put it together. And again, that's one of those sort of things where, this might sound silly, but I would lie in bed at night with headphones on and listen to that and just think, yeah, that's really...
That's good, though. That's good. That's how you know you got it, right? You got to revisit it 100 times and it's still working.
I actually still do it now, not with that one, but every once in a while, I'll go and pick up a random pipe tune from somewhere, I'll import it into Ensemble, and I'll stick it on small pipes and just have a listen and see what it sounds like, and I never get tired of doing that, which is great, because I think part of the problem is when you develop software is you spend all your time in the software, and what I mean by that is in the nuts and bolts of it. It's a bit like the guy who buys an old car to do it up, and he spends all his time with his head under the bonnet fixing it, and never actually drives it.
Never steps back and looks at how pretty the body is.
So I try every once in a while to just actually use the tool for what it was intended to be used for, I pick some of my favourite pipe tunes and I import them if I can find them somewhere in bagpipe music writer format, and import them and go from there. Yeah,
and that's another thing that got me excited about it, is this cross compatibility. It's, if I'm not mistaken, I could take my Celtic Pipes files, tunes that I've already worked through, and I can open them within Ensemble, right?
You can, yeah. So Celtic Pipes supports what's pretty much an industry standard format for music notation, or music, not notation, but the data that goes behind that, called Music XML. Now, the thing about Music XML is it is a dialect for describing music, but the problem you have in the pipe band world is, like anything else, is that there are various variations on that dialect. So, other tools out there like Finale and Sibelius, when you export stuff as Music XML, will be dialectually different from what it would be from Celtic Pipes. So there's quite a bit of technology involved in it, but essentially what you can do is you can export from Celtic Pipes as Music XML and import it into Ensemble, and 99 times out of 100 you'll get a pretty good result,
Yeah.
unless there's something a bit weird going on with maybe the version of Celtic pipes, or maybe some settings that have been tweaked. But generally speaking, that's what you can do. So,
or maybe one of those mini tunes where I just decided to make up an embellishment because I didn't like the standard ones or something like that. Means couldn't play, of course.
Yeah, so you can do that. So cross compatibility was a really important thing for me. I must admit, I didn't achieve the level of cross compatibility I really truly wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
There, as I mentioned earlier, Drumscreeve is a tool that even given its slightly antiquated nature, there are still a lot of people out there using it, and they've honed their craft with using that tool, and they know what they're doing. The problem with it is that the file format it has is what I would call a proprietary binary format, and what I mean by that is it's not really readable other than by the bit of software that generates it. I have approached the people who made it and said, "Can you tell me your file format?" And they said no.
So you made the effort. No one can be too surprised, right?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, I'm not going to make any great comment on that. I asked the question, they said no. So unfortunately, there isn't really a route from Drumscreeve across to Ensemble. But
I can understand. I can imagine though, like just me on the piper side, I know so many pipers who have massive libraries of bagpipe music writer files. Yeah. That in many cases are kind of collecting dust at this point, just because that's kind of, not only have they written them, put them together, but also, I don't know if it's part of the culture of the Napster days or what, but there's, just between a lot of sharing, you'll end up with a piper who's got thousands of tunes on a hard drive, and they're all in bagpipe music writer format. And I don't know anything about that format, like how proprietary it is or what, but I do get
it's easy enough to. It's actually human readable bagpipe music writer because it's human written, and if you like, because you're not going to type all these codes in. Yeah. Interestingly, you mentioned about the sort of the hoarding approach. I had someone approach me the other day on Facebook who said, "I have 5,000 bagpipe music writer files,
and I've learned every one of these tunes."
Well, I didn't get into that. I kind of felt like saying, "Yeah, okay." But he said to me, "Can you import them?" And I said, "Well, if you did it through the interface, it's going to take you a while because you have to kind of do them one at a time, because we're not expecting you to import your whole library,
like a whole batch all at once."
Yeah, but it's the kind of thing. If somebody was insistent upon that, I could automate it for them and do it. But I do think there is that kind of basically taking your whole attic collection and putting it into a bit of software is probably not strictly necessary, but I can understand the thinking behind it. Because
it's an understandable impulse. It makes me think, you were talking about the changes in media. It's like it's exactly the same reason why my dad had a hard time going from VHS to DVD to Blu-ray, because he had to rebuy his entire collection, which is a massive collection of films, and because to convert everything. And before that, he'd converted his cassettes to CD himself and all kinds of stuff, right?
Yeah, it's like I have a collection of vinyl from the 90s sort of dance music type sort of era, rave culture as we would have called it over here. And I once went through the process of digitizing the whole lot, actually using a turntable with a USB and all that. Yeah. And put them on a hard drive, and I'm ashamed to say I lost the hard drive at some point in time. No. So that represents 20 hours of sitting doing all that stuff, maybe more, which is kind of regrettable.
Maybe best not to think too much about just how many hours it was.
No, I think I've kind of given up on the whole concept. So I still have all my vinyl. My wife every once in a while says we should sell them, and she just does that to annoy me. I think I don't want to sell them, but she said, "But you never use them," and I said, "That's not the point."
Yep.
But bagpipe music writer and its various iterations, because you've got bagpipe player and you've got bagpipe music writer, and there's a bit of history there. I think the guys that were involved in writing that kind of fell out and they went their separate ways. But it's all user writable, but it's not the most intuitive thing in the world. It's certainly not something that a relative novice could come along and then start creating music with. And again, another big motivator for me in building Ensemble, and there's a bit of the jigsaw missing. Earlier I talked about creating Drum Writer. I didn't jump from Drum Writer to Ensemble. What I did was I went from Drum Writer to Bagpipe Writer, which was a separate tool. And the reason I did that was because obviously I cracked a lot of the technology in a web-based score writing tool. Okay, it was for drums, but to change that for pipes, in theory, wasn't a massive leap to do. It took me about 6 months, and I had to go and record all the samples, and I was now working with a 5-line stave rather than a single line stave, and I was dealing with pitch, which I wasn't dealing with before, blah blah. But I brought that product out, and I think then I kind of felt like I'd served my apprenticeship, if you like, in terms of the software tools involved in bringing together a full pipe band ensemble into a bit of software. And I appreciate Celtic Pipes had done that long before I did it, but I was doing it in the web, and I was doing it, some of the things that we might come on to talk about is some of the collaborative capabilities.
Right,
of
I
Ensemble,
did want to ask you about that,
Yeah, but, so Drum Writer to Bagpipe Writer and then on to Ensemble, and the key to all of that was ease of use, was, point and click interfaces, and not having the overhead of having to learn big complex workflows that would allow you to create good looking and accessible piping and drumming scores. That was my motivator all the way here, was accessibility, was ease of use, and was an intuitive user interface, or one that somebody could pick up quickly. You just, it literally is just dive in and just, you can be creating music, and I use that term loosely, but you could be creating music pretty quickly. That was the concept.
Yeah. Well, that can. Why is the word suddenly gone? When you're working with other people, that collaborative element is definitely exciting to me as a person who's sort of I've worked with our band. In just sort of in the arena of putting sets together, like trying to make music all look the same, but also not just look the same for it to look nice, but like especially if it's a common tune, you end up with 3 different versions of a tune around the table at practice, and it's like, well, now wait just a second, we're gonna play this in competition, we better get on the same version, and so but I'd run into trouble where, like I'd be trying to collaborate with other leadership members of the band, and I'd say, all right, here it is. Here's my Celtic Pipes, file. And somebody else would be like, I only use Bagpipe Music Writer. I'm like, well, okay. So here's a PDF for you then. But, then I have to make all the edits myself. They come back to me and say, all right, in this measure, it's fine, but you need to change this one part. And so then I have to go back and change it, right? And so maybe just because I'm lazy, it does get me excited to imagine that I could be like, all right, drummers, here's what I've got for you. Make the changes you want to make. And there you go. It's done.
Yeah, so I experience exactly the same problems that you're describing there from a drumming point of view. The classic case where you hand out sheets of music and then somebody makes a change, or your lead drummer makes a change, and you hand out a new set of music, and someone happens to not be there that night, so they rock up the next week and they haven't got the latest version. All these things are really common problems, and you get people that are diligent to put the version number on it and the date and all that sort of stuff, but you still get people with multiple copies of the wrong, the same tune. And I say to myself, right, okay, how do we solve this problem? And technology was the obvious way to solve it, and that was to say, well, can we not just get rid of the paper? Now, I appreciate that there's a certain tactileness to paper, and there's a lot to be said for reading music off of paper rather than reading it off a screen. I understand that and appreciate it, and I don't think that I'm necessarily saying, well, we have to get rid of the paper, but can we at least make it easier to understand what is the latest version and where to go and get it, and to do that in a joined up way. So even from the early days with Drum Writer, I came up with the idea of what I call a core subscription. CORPS, that is, and the idea is that someone subscribes to Ensemble as, say, a leading drummer or a pipe major or whatever they happen to be, a leading tenor, and they create their scores, and then they invite in their core members who get essentially a free read-only access account to Ensemble, and you share the material with them. And as you make updates, when they open up the score, they always see the latest version.
Yeah.
And that in its simplest form is really the collaborative innovation, if you like, within Ensemble.
And that is very attractive.
It is, and again, it's one of these things, again, that kind of felt a little bit before its time, because people just weren't really getting this. And okay, for obvious reasons, it's my most expensive subscription, because most people get benefit from it. And it's taken a while to get traction with that. But I've certainly seen a lot more uptake of that, obviously, in the lockdown that's kind of gone on for the last couple of years, because a lot of bands have obviously not been able to meet in person, but are keen to continue to rehearse. And I think I've seen more people, take up core editions of Ensemble in that time, but for that very reason, because it automates and makes easy the process of disseminating your latest material. And that's been great. I mean, the innovation in Ensemble isn't limited to core edition. What you're also able to do, and you can even do this in real time if you wanted to, is different sections of the band collaborating on a piece of music. So, the classic example is the pipe major or the pipe sergeant selects a tune that you're going to play as a band. So obviously we need to get drum scores written for that tune. We need to get tenor scores done, bass scores done. And the idea is that if your organisation has multiple subscriptions to Ensemble across the different cores, is that you can be working on those scores literally at the same time.
Right. I see the vision, man. I see it. We're sitting around the table and making the changes, but then you're also sitting at your kitchen table during the week and making changes.
Kind of think Google Docs here. Anyone who's a Google Docs user, you could be collaborating on producing a document or a sheet or whatever it happens to be, and you're working at the same time, and you can see who's doing what changes. Yeah. We actually have that in Ensemble. You can be working in real time on the same piece of material. I think in practice that probably doesn't happen that much, but even just the fact that you could be working on a score independently of everyone else, but you're all working on the same thing. Yeah? Right. That's another example of collaboration and really making use of the technology that we're using in the cloud, in real time, on the web.
Yeah. Well, it's nothing but exciting to me. So Ensemble, obviously awesome. You've got a free trial for it, so I would encourage anybody to try it out. It's a very cool piece of software. Do you still say software even though it's web-based? Do you have a different word for it in the IT world?
No, it's still software.
Yeah, you still say that. Okay. But you previous to rolling out Ensemble, you'd already been working with Michael Eagle and the Rhythm Monster folks for Pad Lab, right?
I can't remember the exact timeline. I think the two things probably coincided with each other. I'd been working on drum writer, bagpipe writer, and then working on Ensemble, and actually I think it was one of my drum writer subscribers had started working with Michael at Rhythm Monster, and at that time I didn't really have any engagement with him. And the original engagement was, would I be be interested in maybe Rhythm Monster producing some instructional materials for my tool? That never really went anywhere, not for any particular reason, just never got off the ground. But it kind of piqued my interest in what Rhythm Monster were about, what they were looking to achieve, and so on. So I got together with Michael on a call one day, and I think I went to him with a really boring proposal, like an affiliate agreement or something like that. And he said to me, no, I want to do something much more interesting than that. And I said, oh, okay, tell me about it. And that was the start of the conversation that what is now known as Pad Lab. So Michael's vision, if you like, was, we want to create an interactive learning tool for percussion, given Rhythm Monster's kind of area of interest. And he'd approached a number of different people in the software industry, particularly in the music part of the software industry, and I don't know this firsthand, but essentially they said, no, what you're asking for is not really possible.
I believe it, because that's what I would have thought if I hadn't seen the software functioning. I would have thought, that's not practical. How could you really do that?
Yeah. And Michael came to me with it, and I suppose, again, somewhat naively, I kind of thought, Doesn't sound that difficult. So we actually turned that product round, like from concept to, this is good to go in less than 6 months.
No way.
Yeah,
that really surprises me.
And I think in some ways I kind of surprised the guys at Rhythm Monster, because when they commissioned me to do it, there's obviously two parts to any bit of software like that. There's the sort of the front end bit that everybody sees, but there's also the bit that, well, how do you sync the video with the score? Yeah, so just so everyone, I've probably skipped a bit here, James, in terms of what is PadLab.
You're right. I'm assuming people know. We should mention what it is. Yeah.
So essentially, PadLab is a tool from Rhythm Monster that allows you to have one or more videos of a performer playing a piece of music or an exercise or whatever it is, and also see the written score at the same time. And as you play the video, a playhead will track across the score at that appropriate time. And you've lots of sort of tools around that, like you can have different video angles, you can zoom in on the video, you can pan the video, you can zoom in on the score, you can select parts of the score to play and repeat it, you can slow it down and speed it up.
And that's the magic of it. Like, first of all, I can choose my angle. So I'm watching a drummer play on his pad, and I can watch it from above, from right in front, from the side. Yep. Then I can zoom in closer, I can zoom out, like you say. And then as I can select a section from that, because there's the score written across the bottom of the screen the whole time, and I can say, I want to see, I want to really hone in on from this paradiddle to this flam. Those are the only two drumming terms I know. And then I can say, okay, now I want to watch it at 20 beats per minute. And not only does the playback audio change, the video syncs with the little playhead that you mentioned that goes along the top of the score there. So everything fluidly works together. I can zoom in on that, do it slow, speed it up by 5 BPM, play along with it, speed it up a little more. Okay, now I got that section, open it up to the whole score. Just, it feels kind of like Minority Report when Tom Cruise is just throwing screens around in the air, It's like, now wait a minute, how is this all working so well?
Yeah, there's a lot of technical challenges in that, and certainly when you bring the audio and video aspect into it, and it was quite interesting because we never actually talked about multiple camera angles in the early days, and Michael happened to mention to me, I think probably just in passing, by the way, we have other video, and I'm like, I think we can maybe have a go at trying to have all of those videos playing at the same time, and that was a big technical challenge. It still is today, to be fair, because in the web sort of technology, there's no accepted way of synchronizing multiple videos. There's no API, as we would call it, to support that. So you end up having to build your own techniques to try and keep those two videos in sync. Because bear in mind, those videos, they're not all downloaded at once; they're streaming as well. Yeah, right. So you've got a factor in that they might potentially stream at slightly different rates. So you've got to try and keep them all in sync. And there's certain techniques that we use to do that. And you've also got to remember that you have an audio track that you can't afford to mess around with, because it's got to be.
That's kind of the point of the whole thing.
yeah. So we actually let a little secret is we kind of let the video get a little bit out of sync if we need to. But your brain generally isn't going to detect.
I was going to say, I never would have noticed. I've watched a ton of these videos.
It depends. How far it gets out. I think we have a tolerance of something like 20 milliseconds, something like that. Which sounds really, really small amount of time, but our brains are pretty well tuned into that. It's like if you ever watch television and the lip syncing slightly out with the actual, the audio, it can be one of the most irritating things, and we try and avoid that in PadLab if we can. But yeah, so that was a kind of another. I suppose it was another thing for me where I'd learned a lot about building musical tools for the web, and generally, and it kind of seemed to be an obvious thing for me to turn my hand to, and we've improved it over the years it's been in existence, and we've got some big ideas about how we improve it in the future. The next big thing that we will do, there's a couple of intermediate stages, but the next big thing we're looking to do is actually put the power of that synchronization into the hands of our users. So in other words, you could upload a video and your score, and then synchronize the two. And
you're blowing my mind again, man. That's because that's the thing. I'm like, okay, this is like magic, but then okay, well, magic only happens if there's a whole lot of work behind it, right? Like it must take so much work to make this work, and so the initial upload of any tune must represent a whole lot of work behind it. So surely the end user would never be able to like have the keys to the kingdom, right, and go in there and do their own stuff.
Well, it's not that difficult. I mean, I don't think I'm giving away any trade secrets here in terms of how it works.
Sure.
But essentially, what you have is a series of what we call sync points. So you basically say at this point in the video, this is where we are on the score. Now there is a certain skill set involved in knowing where to put those things. And we have a few we have things like we have a representation of the audio as a graph effectively, so we can see, particularly in drumming, where you've got big beats, flams that are happening, so we can see big spikes that help. But we got a bunch of guys at Rhythm Monster who are first and foremost pipe band musicians, which is great. But secondly, they've got a good ear and a good eye for this kind of thing, and then they've developed a set of skills. But it's not that these skills are out with the grasp of your average user, and that's what we've recognised. So we probably won't release the version that we have today that we use as a back office sort of interface. But
sure, of course.
The idea is to offer that kind of functionality to subscribers of Rhythm Monster, which, and I think the other thing that's interesting about it as well, and I know we think Rhythm Monster is a percussion business, but the whole concept of PadLab actually works potentially across any instrument, if you think about it, where there is a visual cue to what you're playing, that's beyond just the score. And in drumming, we spent a lot of years learning to watch other people as we play.
Yes.
And I know in piping that's a really big thing. If you're standing across the other side of the circle, you're watching the pipe major or the pipe sergeant's fingers as you're playing. And maybe that's a bit of a unique thing within the pipe band world. But certainly we did an example for one of the big drum manufacturers in the United States, and we did I think what you guys would call drum set, what we call drum kit over here in the UK. And that blew my mind because I didn't have a lot to do with that project, and the guys took some footage of a guy, one of the sort of a well-known drum set player, and had the score and synced the two. And I'd never seen PadLab being used away from the pipe band genre. And it was absolutely fantastic to see it being used, because there's nothing about the tool that says this must be used for percussion or this must be used for pipe bands. It's quite a generic tool in that respect.
I'm imagining, was it like they had a camera on the kick pedal and a camera on the hi-hat and a camera on the tom, and so then you could like pick what you were looking at?
Unfortunately, in that example, they hadn't actually filmed it in that way. We took
footage. But they could, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think what they had was they'd had a post-production done where it was basically there was multiple camera angles, but they were all brought down into one set of footage. We didn't have access to the actual original footage.
I see. Yeah.
So
they synced to existing footage.
Yeah.
Kind of a single line of video.
Yeah, you had overhead shots. You did have kick drum shots and all that sort of stuff, but unfortunately they were all edited down into one. If we had the individual ones, then it could have been pretty cool. But that presents a challenge as well, because on a drum set, how many cameras are you going to have?
Some drum sets, man, there'd be a lot of cameras, that's for sure.
There's probably an argument that says you probably only need 2 or 3.
Sure, I mean, if you could zoom in on something specific too, then
yeah. Absolutely. So that's kind of PadLab. It was a really interesting project. It's not finished. It is ongoing, as I say. There's further stages to that, but that was another thing for me that I it wasn't my idea, if you like, but I obviously had an input into the creative process beyond writing the code in terms of how it turned out, and really really good thing to have worked on.
Yeah, well, it's very cool product. So Ensemble is awesome, but it's not even the only awesome thing that you've made. So I congratulate you. And I'll make sure there are links down below to Ensemble, to Rhythm Monster, to anything else that's come up in this conversation. So with Ensemble, there's a large focus on education through experimentation. You got the highly realistic playback, you got the visual indicators, You got for playback, but also for note value accuracy. So it can be a great way for a person to learn music theory, learn how to write music. How do you feel like, was education a focus when you were putting this together, or is it a happy accident that it's also great for education?
Yeah, it's definitely not a happy accident. I set out. I think, what I always tell the people about this whenever I do any kind of interviews or whatever else, or even just chatting with people about Ensemble, is that my ability personally to read and write music, drumming music, wasn't really that great before I did my first software product. And I almost used my own tools to learn how to read and write drumming music, which sounds really quite strange and a bit mind-blowing, but it's true. And my thinking in creating these tools was that if you make it really easy for someone to, let's take drumming for example, as a drummer, to just throw some stuff down on a score and then play it back, you're then starting to create those connections that often people struggle with, which is a connection between what you hear and what you see. Yeah, and when I say that, I don't mean what you see in terms of someone's hands with the drumsticks, because that's straightforward enough. But actually, what's down on paper versus what you're hearing. And the theory was that, and this is why playback and accurate playback was, and realistic playback was really, really important for me, because what I hope and I've seen happen with Ensemble is that people will have a rough idea of the notational aspects of what they're doing, but they maybe struggle with some of the nitty gritty. And what Ensemble will let you do is obviously just play around with that until you get what you're looking for.
Right.
And is that unique to Ensemble? No, not at all. Don't get me wrong. There are other tools out there that will let you do exactly that. But I think it's important to stress that Ensemble has a number of aspects to it that are designed, and I think the accessibility thing comes in here again, because the idea that you have to be on a PC or you have to be on a Mac to use this piece of software was something I was very keen not to have. So you can be on an iPad or whatever else, and you can just wherever you can even
be on a phone, right?
You can be on a phone. It's tricky on a phone,
of course, small screen, yeah,
small screen, but you can still be on a phone. But the idea is that I think we learn a lot of things. If and again, this comes back to probably subjects that I'm not qualified to really talk about in any great detail. But as children, we learn how to do things by trying them out.
Yeah, learning by doing, right?
It's trial and error. And I think there's a lot to be said for that in how we learn to read and write pipe music, because if you have a go at writing a drum score, what better way to learn the building blocks that go behind that? Now, okay, I appreciate there's a whole science and everything else that is behind that, but not everyone is inclined to learn it from a very theoretical point of view. If you're going to learn it from a more practical point of view, then you're going to start to understand how these things work. And I was keen with something like Ensemble to make it a bit of a playground, if you like, that people can just sit in there and start to understand that, well, actually a 7-stroke roll is this. That's what it looks like in here. So once I've learned that, that's a building block that I can use in how I write other scores. And we provide sample scores, or you can go and get scores from other places, and even just putting other scores in that what they sound like, and you put them in. And then you say, well, what happens if I change that and take that bit out there and put in maybe a flam rhythm or something like that? All right, okay. How do I make that fit the measure of the music at that point in time and the time signature of the music? And Ensemble will tell you when you got that wrong, or it'll tell you when you got it right. Yeah, and it'll even tell you where you don't have enough notes or note values, or you've got too many note values. It'll tell you where you got the groupings of the notes wrong as well, versus the beat structure and things like that. So there's a lot of visual and audible cues within a tool like Ensemble that helps you understand how to build, how to write music. And I think it's really interesting. I remember approaching, I won't actually name the organisation, but I remember approaching an organisation to see if they would help sort of promote Ensemble. And one of the arguments I used with them is that quite often when we teach people to write music and teach music theory, we still use pen and paper. And my argument against that is that if you're going to write an essay, in this day and age, what are you going to write it in? Yeah, are you going to pull out your notepad and your quill and are you going to you're not going to do it, are you? Yeah, you really aren't. Yeah, you're going to use a word processor. Yeah, and essentially, I kind of feel like I don't like this phrase, but I'm going to use it. Is Ensemble is kind of like a word processor for pipe band music. Yeah, and it has the equivalents of the spell checker, grammar checker.
Okay,
and
that totally makes sense. Yeah,
that's kind of the analogy I like to use. Yeah, and again, I'm not making any great claims here that this is totally unique about Ensemble, but what makes it unique is the fact that you can do that in a very, very accessible way. Yeah. So you can be anywhere literally, and provided you got a cellular data connection or a Wi-Fi connection, you can be sitting working in Ensemble, and you could be experimenting or you could be an expert and you know exactly what you're doing, whatever it happens to be. It caters to all levels of ability. So that's kind of... Sorry.
And I appreciate that you mentioned wanting it to feel like a playground, because I had the idea of learning by doing, bouncing around in my head anyway. But I feel like what you're presenting is maybe even better in that it's learning by playing, right? And playing, taken whichever way you want to take that word, right? Yeah. By playing around or by playing an instrument, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a lot about how we learn a lot of things. Through experimentation. And I appreciate there's a whole science behind different learning styles, and I think the experiential part of it for people works really well. For other people, it doesn't. For other people, they would probably find that difficult, and they think, I'm just messing around here. They probably want to go and read a book on music theory and then come back to it.
Right.
But I find, a lot of my users of Ensemble, people I've said this before to people and they get surprised by it. A lot of the support work I do on Ensemble, where people are asking questions, they're not always and invariably not really about how to use the software. They tend to be more about music and music theory. Yeah. And whilst I am not an expert, I got the odd qualification in music theory, but I kind of did that after the event and building these tools for my own benefit. But I can certainly help people out, and I think once people start to grasp that and use the cues that are in Ensemble, the classic case that I see a lot of is excuse me, tunes that start with an anacrusis or a pickup note. And the amount of people, from a snare drumming point of view, who don't appreciate that note's there. So when they come to notate their score, they're actually half a beat out. But
or they get to the end and they go, wait a minute, there's supposed to be another note here. What's
Yeah, exactly. And again, that's where something like Ensemble helps, because if you've got a pipe tune in front of you, you can easily see that the very first note sits in its own measure or own bar. So you're either going to need to play nothing there, or you're going to need to play some kind of pickup note that matches what the pipes are doing at that point in time. So again, that's another example. Bringing the other instrument in that then gives you a very obvious cue that Whereas if you look at traditional, score writing software, out away from like the Celtic pipes, which can cope with that, but this idea you're going to write a drum score in isolation from every other instrument that's involved, for me is it doesn't make sense. So so the next natural part of that is that if you're trying to write a drum score, for example, to match a pipe tune, you're going to want to match the rhythmic nature of that pipe tune. And the way you do that, obviously, is by picking out the key structure that's in the pipe tune, not only in terms of its repeating sections and things like that, but also just right down to nitty gritty of the fact that dot cut rhythms and things like that.
Right, the strong points and so on.
So what we're actually doing there is going a stage further. We're facilitating the fact that people who want to write drum scores who maybe don't have a huge amount of experience, who can play, they can play, but they've never composed. We're saying, okay, well, you really need to start to understand a little bit more about the pipe structure. And again, you can do that by, let's play it through. Let's play through that one measure, right? What's happening in that measure there? What is the rhythmic structure? Okay, let's throw some notes down on the page and let's see what it sounds like. Right. So it's promoting that whole culture, if you like. I don't know if that's the right word, but of spending time listening and experimenting and that whole sort of musical sandbox, if you like, to promote how. And I have evidence that people have learned a lot from that, and I have other evidence that says that, you know, if we go back to the core edition stuff, where band members are constantly being fed new material through Ensemble with the playback capability, that it's actually improved the ability for these people to read music, and in other cases for people to actually write music. You know,
Yeah.
I certainly know in the drumming world, and I think this is changing, thankfully, but we were guilty for a lot of time of not really embracing writing down what we're playing.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't know why that is, and I imagine it probably is just a historical thing. And I think that, you know, as I say, thankfully, I think that is changing and has changed and will continue to change as probably more, you know, younger people are being taught how to read music and are able then to pass those skills on. And that's where tools like Ensemble become a bit more second nature, rather than being this big sort of shock that's like, oh, I'm faced with this very foreign thing where I need to take, you know, this very, you know, demonstrative skill, you know, a very, very tactile skill, and then turn it into this abstract format, which is the music.
Right.
And I do think that these tools will become, over time, as the skills of people keep step with that, will become a more natural thing for people to want to use.
I mean, it's something like developing just literacy amongst a population. Like, we all speak, but then to turn your words into something that can be represented on a page, it can happen within an individual, but as it happens within a culture, man, there's so many exciting things that can. As I'm listening to you talk about it, I'm just thinking like we're removing barriers that might allow more people to not only understand, but as they understand, to create. And so it's just exciting to think about, like, how many drum scores, how many tunes, how many medleys, how many sets have not been written in the world that are going to be written in the next decades, you know? Mm-hmm. And we've got more potential authors entering the field through tools like this, you know?
Yeah. I think the other analogy I like to use, which is probably not as well put as yours, but the example I give is that if you imagine as a drummer or a piper, you can't read music, but you can learn by rote by someone, you know, teaching you, if you like. That's the equivalent of walking into a library, and there's all these books, but you have to ask someone to read it to you.
Right.
Which, if you imagine that, you know, the ludicrousness of that, if you like, in general society, we just, you know, I appreciate literacy as a challenge for some people, and I'm not belittling that, but generally speaking, for the general populace, that's a ridiculous idea that you have to have a book read to you, you know, when you go in the library, and you're missing out on so many things, you know, be it fiction or otherwise. And I think the pipe band world kind of, to some extent, suffers from that, because there are so many people out there, there's so many tunes out there that are well written, there's so many publications and all that, and if you can't pick that up, and I'm not saying that you should be able to sight read it and play it with it first pass, not at all, but at least understand the notation and understand how to turn that into you being able to learn that tune. I think people are missing out on an awful lot, and I think in the drumming world we suffer from that much more than we do than pipers do. It's
Dr. Is it Stephanie Burns who wrote?
Yeah, Stephanie Burns. Yeah.
Yeah, she's talked about this idea that, like, look, don't think you have to be a sight reading master, but do learn enough to be able to at least struggle through and figure out what's on the page, because it opens up this whole world of possibilities to you. Yeah.
I've certainly experienced people, drumming wise, who are like phenomenal sight readers. And I always remember one time being in Belgium, and I was there with my band, and there was a guy from another band, just a young guy, and we were playing through quite a complex medley, or it wasn't that complex, but complex enough. Anyway, we put the music in front of him. He joined in with us playing it, and he played it pretty much perfectly first time.
Just hopped right in.
I was absolutely blown away by that because I know I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
And I remember when I did my drumming qualification here in Scotland, one of the things that they do is make you sight read, so they just throw a bit of music in front of you. And I've never been so nervous about anything in my life.
Yeah.
And thankfully, the guy, I think he took some pity on me because he threw a relatively straightforward 6/8 march in front of me, and I was able to play it through reasonably well. But they could give you anything. They could give you like quite a high, high level, 6-parted 2/4 or something like that, or or a really complicated strathspey. But I think the literacy aspect of the pipe band world for me is something I'm really, really keen on. And I think Ensemble, it's not the answer, if you like, but I think it's a tool in our armory that can help. And it doesn't, not just Ensemble, but any music notation software. But it comes down to how easily accessible that tool is, and for the people who are not only writing the music, but the people that are consuming it.
Yeah. So the game is remove barriers. How many barriers can we remove? Just make it easier for people to get in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, Kirk, this has been a real delight. I apologize for keeping you for so long, but I mean, honestly, I could keep asking you questions. Maybe we can circle around and have another conversation sometime. Maybe talk more in depth about some of these concepts that have come up, because a lot of things have got my brain sort of tickled now.
Okay.
I often ask people about pizza. How do you feel about pineapple on pizza, Kirk?
There's no place whatsoever.
Not supposed to happen, huh?
Nah, it's really not supposed to happen. And my wife actually likes Hawaiian, I think it's called.
Yep.
My wife actually likes it, and I absolutely I can't find strong enough words to describe how much that. It's
a testament to your love for your wife that you're willing to stick with her in spite of her abhorrent preferences when it comes to pizza.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely.